Today we're going to look at how we configure CDP and LLDP in a lab topology that's similar to what we see on this slide. So for instance, we have a Nexus 7000 that's connected to Cisco ACI Fabric as well as UCS Fabric interconnects, and we're going to be able to see that with our neighbor discovery protocols. In regards to our configuration steps, for CDP the first thing that we're going to do is log into the switch, and we're going to check to make sure that CDP is configured globally and the different commands that we can use to configure CDP. By default, CDP is enabled. The next thing we're going to do is examine how we can configure CDP on a per interface basis. And then we're going to run some show commands to see the type of information that CDP can give us. We're then going to transition to LLDP configuration, which is a little bit different because we actually have to enable a feature in order to get the commands to configure LLDP. For instance, feature LLDP. Next, we're going to check the type of configuration commands that we have available to us globally across the whole switch, and then we're going to take a look at some of the show commands that we get with CDP. Let's go take a look at the switch. As you can see, we're logged into our switch via a SSH connection and our secure console software. And if I take a look right now and do some show commands and start typing CDP, I can then do a tab to see what commands are available to me. If I do show CDP global, I'll see that CDP is enabled by default globally across the switch, and that it's got certain defaults configured by default for this command. So I can see that my refresh time is 60 seconds and my hold time is going to be 3 times that, which is 180 seconds. So I'm going to send information back and forth every 60 seconds if I don't receive something for 180 seconds. Then I'm going to clear the database of that information. So by default, CDP is enabled globally, as we discussed. I can also go into different interfaces and I can actually turn CDP off on those interfaces. So for instance, if I type configure terminal to get into our global configuration, and then I transition to the Ethernet interface that I want to configure, in this case Ethernet 4/11, I can actually go in here and type no CDP enable, and this will turn off CDP on that interface. So now if I say show running configuration interface E4/11, it's going to show me the configuration that's running on that interface, and I can see that the command no CDP enable has been inputted on that interface. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off again. So I turn that off by doing the opposite of that command, which is CDP enable. And CDP is once again running on that interface. If I'd like to see what CDP is discovering out on my network, all I have to do is type in show CDP neighbor, and I can see the other devices on my network that my discovery protocol is finding. So for instance here, I can see that I have a 9372, which is actually part of my ACI infrastructure. And if I continue to page down here, I can see that I have my UCS devices at the very bottom, A and B. So I can see that it's actually discovering my topology for me, and it's telling me what interfaces I have physically connected between these devices. So it can be a very useful troubleshooting tool. I can get more information by saying show CDP neighbor detail, and this will show me more in-depth information on a device-by-device scenario so that I can see, for instance, the IP address, the capabilities of that device, whether it's a router or switch or both, and then also I can see which VLAN we're communicating over, as well as what software the other device is running. So I get a ton of information here without actually having to walk out to my network rack and take a look or console into these devices individually. Let's take a look at the LLDP configuration. LLDP is not enabled by default, and as a matter of fact, we have to turn on a feature called LLDP in order to get the commands to be able to use to configure that software. So if I try to type anything to do with LLDP right now, it won't recognize that command because we haven't actually turned on that feature. If I run a command called show feature and include LLDP, I will see that LLDP is disabled. So I'm going to input a command called feature LLDP to turn LLDP on. And once I do that, I will now have LLDP commands available to me. As you can see, I just typed in LLDP, I pressed tab, and it gave me the different commands that I can go ahead and enter in regards to the LLDP command. So I can change the timer values, I can change the hold time, similar to what you saw in CDP. I can also now run show commands in regards to LLDP, and in this case I can see show LLDP neighbor now shows me the other devices that are also running the LLDP protocol. So for instance, in this case, I can see that UCS 1A and B are running LLDP and that they're advertising that from the interfaces 1/8 to my switch's interfaces 5/23 and 5/24. So as you can see, these can be very beneficial commands for helping me troubleshoot my network. They can almost be a single source of truth on that switch for how the physical cabling is actually connected on that switch. So there's times when my documentation may be wrong, there's times when I don't have access to the rack of devices, or there's times when things just don't make sense, and this is a great command to run to be able to find out the truth on how these devices are connected, which ports they're connected to, which types of devices they are, as well as the different configuration inputs for that device. This concludes Lesson 6. Please join me for our next lessons.